Awesome. We're rolling. The purpose of this interview is to give hunters in British Columbia kind of the basic context of what's required for a science based approach to managing wild turkey populations and the hunting of wild turkeys. Currently, the province has a hunting regulation proposal out changing some aspects of the wild turkey hunting season in the Region 4 area of southern British Columbia. And so I just want folks to know what are the types of questions they should be asking, what is the type of information that they should be asking from the biologist in order to be engaged in science-based decision making around wild turkey hunting and wild turkey management. So joining me today is Dr. Mike Chamberlain. How you doing?
Doing well. How about you?
Awesome. We were just chatting before the recording here. The sun's coming out where you live. I have a snowfall advisory on, so that's the joy of being almost at opposite ends of the continent, so at least halfway apart. Um, Mike, you are from the Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Georgia, and you've been researching wild turkeys for over 30 years. Is that still the correct number?
That is. It makes me feel really old.
Yeah. Well, you probably started when you were 20,
Yeah, that's true.
25.
That's true. Good point. Yeah.
Absolutely. So our wild turkey seasons in British Columbia, so the populations have grown, which is awesome. Over my lifetime, I've seen it go from where it was just a select few permits in some areas to general open seasons. As the turkey populations grow, we start to see a bit more conflict of turkey flocks taking up residence in communities, kind of hanging around private land and agriculture areas. Start to see a little bit of conflict, and so the general, there's been twofold. Wildlife managers want to increase opportunity if it's there, and they also want to show that they're doing something, with the problem flocks. And what I've seen is the trend towards lengthening the season. They've
Hmm.
wanted to start the season earlier. Where I live, it's April 15th is our start date. I've seen proposals where they've wanted to move it back as early as the 1st of April. They're now proposing to extend it from the 15th of May to the end of May. We've gone from like a regional bag limit of one tom or bearded turkey in the spring to one bearded turkey in the spring, two in the fall of any sex. So we're potentially, if a hunter wanted to, could be narrowing down to taking three toms a year. Out of my region, we have a winter season and a private land only hunt as well. So things are starting. I'm all for hunter opportunity, but they're starting to stack up a little bit. Where I'm starting to be like, are we headed down a dangerous path here in British Columbia without a whole lot of science? So, Mike, maybe just give folks kind of a high level overview of wild turkey management and the use of science. What is the basic type of science and data that wildlife managers use to set hunting seasons and bag limits with the goal of sustainable harvest and sustainable populations in mind? What types of information would a wildlife manager need back from hunting, harvest stats,
Hmm. Hmm.
monitoring, trend monitoring? What types of things should science be supporting wildlife managers there? And then lastly, maybe fill us in on what you're seeing around North America of some of the emerging issues to do with early start dates, late start dates, and multiple tom bag limits.
Yeah. So to kind of start, the recommendations that many states have followed for years, or not, were kind of predicated on this notion that, based on research that was conducted many decades ago, there was a realization that the most conservative spring hunting season framework would be to time the beginning of the season with peaks and nest incubation. meaning that you would have your season open at a time when a lot of your hens had already started incubating nest, and therefore that would accomplish two things. One, hens would not be available for a legal harvest in areas where it was illegal to shoot hens during the spring. But more importantly, it would ensure that most breeding was completed. And at that point, toms, some percentage of your toms were expendable. You could then remove that percentage and have no influence on the mating season, if you will. There would be no disruptions to breeding. And that's kind of, if you think about it biologically, that's kind of intuitive. If you wanted to ensure that your hunting season framework was commensurate with the bird's biology, you would wait until most breeding had occurred, and then you would remove males at that point. Interestingly enough, if people don't know this, wild turkeys are one of the only birds that are hunted primarily during their mating season, and so that introduces challenges to managers, because we are going into this bird's breeding season, and we're plucking out males that are involved in the breeding process. So that is why it's been widely recognized that to be really conservative, to be ultra conservative, let's just time the season based on peaks and nest incubation. And to do that, you need to know when nest incubation is, right? So that would, that to your question about, well, what information do you need to have available to you? Well, one piece of information that you would need to have available if you're going to structure your season based on the science would be to know, when are your hens, when are peaks in incubation. And some states, to be frank, some states have largely ignored that science. Other states have, for many, many years, generated seasons that were very biologically based, if you will, based on kind of this notion that, well, let's let these hens get to nest, and then let's remove the correct percentage of toms from the population. And if we do that, then this is sustainable through time. To your point about, well, what's going on in many other areas, the situation you described in BC is almost polar opposite of what you're seeing in a lot of states in the U.S., which is, instead of liberalizing seasons, many states are backing up and saying, wait a minute, we're going to have to scale this activity back. You're seeing many states that are reducing bag limits, many states that are changing hunter opportunity, whether they're limiting non-resident tags. You're seeing a number of states that are delaying the openers, the opening dates of their seasons, with the rationale being what I just mentioned, that, okay, we now understand that peaks in nest incubation are April 10th, for instance. I'm just picking a number in our state. So let's make sure we're not opening our season too early, based on the fact that we now have a good understanding of what our nest incubation dates are. So that's kind of what you're seeing across a lot of the species range. And it's not just where I'm sitting here in the Southeast. I mean, if you look across the Midwest, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, they've all made regulatory changes recently, trying to reduce harvest. And the reason being that, as you know, harvest is one of the few levers that an agency can pull at a broad scale. I mean, when it comes time to try to change something at a state level, harvest is one thing that an agency would look at, because they can control that at a state level.
Yeah, Yeah, definitely. Couple questions to that. So in setting your season dates, is is the peak incubation like, are there some published dates where you can say it's fairly synchronous across large geographic areas of North America, or
Mhm.
is this something like in a local area you really need to figure out for yourself and get that dialed in? Because you know, is somewhere like where we are in southern British Columbia, could Montana be the source of like what are they doing, or Washington, or could you be like, hey, you're a couple of degrees farther north in latitude, that could mean a plus or minus 5 days, which could be really important. Like what should science or biologists or managers be doing, looking to the published science, or should they be really site specific with this peak
You can,
incubation period?
yeah, you can. And there have been some analyses looking at this question from a almost a continental scale, if you will. And what you do see is very clearly that there are latitudinal changes in the mating process. So, for instance, peaks in nest incubation here in Georgia are around mid-April. Um, as you move up to say, Pennsylvania, it's early May, and then as you progress farther north, it moves on into well into May as you get say up into South Dakota and North Dakota and Montana, those areas. So yes, there are published data that you can rely on, because this period, I mean, this is the mating process. At least the receptivity of hens to breeding is mostly driven by photoperiod, although so day length obviously. So yeah, you see some changes from year to year, let but they're very subtle changes. If you look through time on the projects we've done that are say decade long projects, the peaks in nesting are literally a few days from one another from one year to the next. I mean, we're not talking in a particular at a particular latitude. You may see across 10 years, you may see 3 or 4 days difference, give or take. So this is largely synchronized to the point where, in your case, you could look at research at comparable latitudes and make a pretty reliable prediction that this is approximately when the peak of our nesting is occurring.
Okay, okay, no, that's good, that's good to know. Now the other question I had kind of is about, it was really interesting what you said. It's like we're literally hunting this bird, one of the only birds that we do, in the middle of their breeding season. Now I'm to understand turkeys are unique in the sense of establishing, the males establishing this hierarchy, this pecking order, which they're kind of like working on throughout the year, becomes a little bit more intense as it starts to get closer to the breeding season. Now, if you're removing the dominant males in a hierarchy out of a group of five or three, or whatever toms, is it true that that completely breaks the breeding structure, and the remaining birds kind of have to sort out their pecking order and then move back into like the strut, so to speak, back into the rut? Or is there a second in command? If the commander's taken out, this guy, just everybody knows he moves up to be the top ranking officer and gets sort of the breeding rights? Or is it just a free for all and all males are breeding kind of if they get the chance? What's happening, and what are the consequences of removing dominant birds in the
Yeah,
middle
so
of this?
yeah, so the no, that it's not a free for all. I mean, we know that dominance matters in wild turkeys, and research has clearly shown that dominant birds disproportionately breed more than other birds. So, and that shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody that's spent time around turkeys. I mean, clearly there are dominant individuals in both males and female flocks, and dominance matters. We know that dominant hens nest earlier, and we know that dominant toms breed most of the hens in our populations. To your other questions, what we, what we there's a lot we do know and there's a lot we don't know. We know that in the presence of a dominant bird, a subordinate bird may or may not even be capable of successfully breeding. When you remove that dominant tom, what happens then is a bit unclear. We know from captive imprinted birds that if you kind of break this dominance hierarchy apart, that it's not as simple as the second bird just steps up and becomes the dominant guy. They kind of they shuffle things and then sort things out again. Now, how long that takes is unclear. There's I suspect it. This is my suspicion, and only that. Um, I suspect it differs a lot from one flock to the next based on how many toms are there, on how well established the dominance hierarchy is. In other words, if you only have a few toms and one gets removed, I suspect it's a much shorter time frame to kind of get everything reset than if you had 6 or 8 or 10 toms in a breeding group. Um, that's a really hard thing to understand because it's tough to study. You really need to answer your question. You really need to be able to experimentally remove birds from certain flocks and observe what happens. And unfortunately, I'm not saying it's impossible. It's a very difficult research question to get at. But what research many, many years ago did show was if you go into these populations very early in the breeding process and you remove a significant number of dominant birds, you do disrupt breeding, which to me is kind of logical. I mean, that seems logical, which again goes back to well, one way to make sure that we don't disrupt breeding would just to be to time the season to where it's late enough in the breeding period where some percentage of your toms are expendable and you because most breeding has been concluded. And that's back at nest incubation, because what turkeys do, like right now I'm getting emails about, hey, here's a trail camera picture of a turkey breeding. Yes, it's early March here in Georgia, and you will see some breeding now. You're going to see breeding next week, the following week, the following week, the following. I mean, they're designed to continually breed over and over until they start nesting. And they'll even breed with toms while they're laying. So while they're going to the nest each day and laying an egg in a clutch, they're continuing to copulate with males. And that's the way they're supposed to function. So can a turkey produce a clutch with only one breeding? Yes, they can, because they store sperm in their bodies, so they can breed with one tom once and produce a clutch of eggs. But that's missing the whole point. They're designed to breed multiple times, and then the most fertile sperm, the most viable sperm wins, and that's what fertilizes the clutch. So she's supposed to be, quote unquote, be able to go back to the well, if you will, and breed more than once with either the same dominant bird or multiple birds in the population. That's kind of how their mating system works.
Interesting. Wow. Now, is there dangers to the population? I'm thinking in the sense of clutch survival. If you're getting into the later part of the spring, you know, hens are nesting, they're incubating, but you still are keeping hunters in the woods. So I'm thinking of the scenario of pushing the season later into the spring, and you still got hunters out there. They're walking around. Are they bumping into hens on the nest? Is that disruptive? Is there any threats or risks to her ability to successfully hatch that clutch if there's a lot of hunters in the turkey woods late in the year?
Actually, I have a fellow, a colleague here that works with me and has for many years that's actually doing an analysis on this now. But we don't see, well, first of all, what the research has clearly shown is when you start hunting, both sexes, toms and hens, both react to hunting pressure. They move farther away from roads. They move farther away from points that you and I would access to go hunt, parking areas, roadways, trails, things, ways that we would get into the forest or wherever to hunt. But then as hunting kind of wears on and the hunting pressure starts to kind of wane later in the season, they go back to acting the way they did before the season started. So we clearly see that with both sexes. And what we also see is that hunters don't bump into hens a lot while they're incubating. And I think the reason for that is nesting habitat is generally thicker, brushier, taller vegetation than you and I really seek to walk through. So, when I'm speaking personally, so later in the season here, I'm trying to avoid heavy cover because toms are not going to be in heavy cover. And I don't want to walk through that. So we kind of see that once hens start incubating clutches, hunters are really not walking through those areas often.
Okay.
And what I would say to people is, if you happen to bump into a nest and the hen flushes off of the nest, leave. Just don't walk over to the nest. Don't pick the eggs up. Certainly don't put a camera on the nest. That's asking for an abandonment. Just let her be. If you leave, she almost assuredly will come back. That's what most of the time they come back and resume incubation and go about their life. When you go monkeying around with a nest and leaving your scent, and that's when you're doing more harm than good. So I say this all the time. If you happen to bump into a hen, don't worry about it. Just get out of there and let her go about her day. She'll come back.
Okay. Okay. No, that's a good, good message. Lastly, what type of information from the hunt is important for wildlife managers to look at, and measure objectives in the hunting season? Is there anything more to it than just what's the total number of birds that were killed in hunting season X? Is there, like,
Mm-hmm.
was that in the front end of the season, the back end of the season, or is it just an aggregate harvest? What's important to a good science-based decision maker?
Yeah, I mean, obviously knowing harvest is good. Knowing the kind of the distribution of when birds are harvested is certainly valuable information. In other words, having some type of system like a telecheck system or something where hunters have to register that they killed a bird within some period, 72 hours. I'm just going to throw that out there, or 48 hours, or whatever. That then allows the agencies to understand when birds are being harvested, because what you see in most situations is the bulk of your harvest occurs the first couple of weeks of the season, regardless of when you open the season. Most of the toms that are going to die within the first few weeks. The other thing that's really important to understand from a science perspective is hunter effort. How many hunters are out there participating in this activity? Because in the absence of knowing hunter effort, harvest data in and of itself is not as valuable. Um, Knowing how many people are out there participating in this activity, and then, okay, how many birds are those people taking given that amount of effort, that allows you to compare your data to other data sets, whether it be other provinces or other states. That becomes much more powerful. So yeah, knowing harvest and kind of the timing of harvest, and then knowing hunter effort. Those are really important pieces of information.
Okay. No, that makes sense. I mean, we do see that in big game species is hunter effort as well as harvest by by sex as well. So great information, Mike. I know this was high level. Hopefully, some folks glean some stuff through that they're able to now go engage and maybe make some comments or at least ask questions in the comments sections that you can make on the hunting regulation proposals. To a good question might be as important or maybe more valuable than a comment for wildlife managers to see that if hunters want to continue to advocate for science-based decision making. There's some good questions that you can ask in the comments. The big message that I glean from what I learned from you here is we're hunting these birds in their breeding season. They're sensitive to that. There are potential consequences to the sustainability of the population and the hunt from what we're doing, and a conservative based approach is paramount. And that's kind of what you're saying, that some of the states are starting to shift to away from liberalization to more conservative approaches to maintain both hunting and populations over the long term. So did I
Yeah,
did I read
yeah,
that
for
right?
sure. Yeah, for
Awesome.
sure. I mean, I
Awesome.
think at the end of the day, I think all turkey hunters would agree that we want to make sure that our activities are as reasonable and appropriate as possible, so that we can enjoy this bird, you know, 20, 50 years from now, just like we're enjoying it now. And to do that, I mean, I'm obviously I'm biased because I'm a scientist, but when I say, trust the science, I mean, we've known how to appropriately harvest turkeys for 50 years. Um, so if people have interest in obtaining that information, it's certainly out there. And like I've given a very broad overview of it today. But if people want to dig deeper into the weeds, there's plenty of
Yeah.
weeds to dig into.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think and British Columbia doesn't have that long history, just in the order of a couple of decades. And so, why I hosted this conversation is because I think the trend that I'm seeing in British Columbia is, oh, there's some birds, okay, we can do a little bit of hunting. Oh, there's more birds, we can do more hunting. Holy smokes, there's lots of birds, let's do more hunting. Now we're getting complaints about all these birds, so let's even do more hunting. And at some point we're going to go, whoops, we overshot what we should have been doing. Now populations are struggling, hunters can't find birds anymore, they may be starting to disappear from areas, and then now we're going like, oh geez, what can we do to start rebuilding some of these populations? That's a historic kind of pattern, and I really don't want to see us to go down that path with this amazing hunting opportunity and these flocks that we have in southern BC. So really appreciate you giving that scientific lens to folks, and hopefully that helps.
Sure, glad to participate. Hope it helps.
Folks, if you want to learn more from Mike, Wild Turkey Doc on Instagram.
Yep, yep.
That's right. He does this super cool thing. I think I'm one of tens of thousands of hunters in North America that look forward to Turkey Tuesday, when Mike's got this really cool little write up on his Instagram post on some aspect of turkeys and turkey science, and you learn a lot. And 6 o'clock in the morning with my cup of coffee, Tuesday mornings, and probably, like I said, with thousands of people doing exactly that same thing. And you've also got the wildturkeylab.com, the website, which is kind of like a hub for wild turkey research throughout North America. So if you want to dig into this more, like you said, get into the weeds, that's a good starting point right there. So
Yeah, for
anything
sure.
else to add to what we've said
No,
here,
I
Mike?
think we covered the bases.
Awesome. Appreciate it. And thanks so much for giving us your time. And look forward to seeing how your turkey season unfolds.
Yeah, same to you, Mark. Good luck.
All right. Thanks.